Hey everyone, it's Heather Nichols, and I have the cutest gnome card to share with you today that's perfect for Valentine's Day or to send some love to that special someone. I did create a card and tag coordinating set. Today I'm going to show you how to do the card with this cute little heart banner. It all starts with the Like Gnome Other stamp set and coordinating dies. I'll also be using the cable knit background stamp. I'll be using the Layer It Toadstool die collection. I'm using the largest die in the Petite Scallop Rectangle Stacklets die collection. For ink colors, I'll be using Oreo, Sugar Cube, Toffee, and Pumpkin. I'll also be using blender brushes, and I'll be coloring my stamped images with Copic markers and doing shading with Prismacolor pencils along with Gamsol. I'm using the Bits and Pieces Hearts embellishments, burlap twine, and multimedia matte for a liquid adhesive. I have some foam squares to pop a few things up on my project, and then finally I'll be adding some splatters to my project using my tried and true Sugar Cube ink refill, chocolate truffle liquid watercolor, and a water brush. I'm starting things off with creating the little heart banner. This takes the longest to dry, so I'm doing it first so that it can be dry when I'm ready to add it to my card. I'm using 3 of the red colored hearts, and I will be adding those to a piece of burlap twine using my liquid adhesive, which I'm using the multimedia matte, but you can use other kinds of liquid adhesive as well. I'm gluing them onto the piece of burlap twine over a craft mat. I also have done this over a glass mat. I just recommend choosing something that the glue isn't going to adhere to. Cardstock would not be a good choice because when it comes time to pick that up, it'll stick right to it. Once I have my 3 hearts glued to the burlap twine, I'll set this aside to dry. Next, I'll stamp the 2 gnomes from the Like Gnome Other stamp set. They are so cute. I'll be stamping those with Oreo ink on Sugar Cube cardstock. I'm setting up a piece of cardstock in my MISTI, and I'll set the stamps right down on the cardstock. Close the lid of the MISTI to pick up the stamps. I'll ink up my stamp with Oreo ink, and I'll stamp the images right onto the piece of cardstock by closing the lid of my MISTI. To color my gnomes, I'll be using Copic markers to lay down a base of color on the images, and then I'll go back with Prismacolor pencils. I've chosen colors of pencils that are just a little bit darker than the colors of Copic marker that I've laid down on the images. So I will add shadows and shading with the Prismacolor pencils, and then I'll go back with Gamsol. I'm using a paper stump, and I'll press that into my Gamsol container, and then I'll use that paper stump to blend out the color from the Prismacolor pencils. Next, I'll cut out the colored gnomes with the coordinating dies. I'm just trimming this in half so I can run these right through my Sidekick machine. I'm just laying the dies right on top of the images. I'll line them up and then secure them with a piece of removable tape, and I'll send them through my Sidekick machine to cut them out. Next, I'm cutting out the pieces to create the cute little Toadstools. I'm using Sugar Cube cardstock and Pumpkin cardstock. I've backed both of my pieces of cardstock with Stick It, and I'll run those right through my Sidekick machine to cut all the pieces out that I need. I used my blender brushes to add a little bit of shading and dimension to my toadstools. You can use the toadstools without shading, but I just wanted to step them up a little bit. I'm using pumpkin ink and just adding shading along the bottom of the caps of the toadstools, and then I'll use toffee ink to add some shading and dimension to the toadstool stems. Once the blending's complete, I'll put these cute little toadstools together. I'll just peel off the paper backing from the Stick It, and I'll attach the caps of the toadstools right onto the base, right above the stems. The background of my card is stamped with the cable knit background stamp, and I'm stamping that with Sugar Cube ink onto toffee cardstock. I'm adding the stamp into my MISTI, and I will close the lid of the MISTI to pick up the stamp on the lid. Then I'll put my cardstock in with a little bit of adhesive to hold it in place. I'll ink up my stamp with Sugar Cube ink and then close the lid of the MISTI to stamp the background onto the toffee cardstock. I always love adding splatters to my projects, and I'm doing that with Sugar Cube ink refill. I'll add some drops of the refill onto an acrylic block, pick it up with a water brush, and then tap that water brush on my finger marker to splatter the ink onto my project. I'll also add some splatters using chocolate truffle liquid watercolor in the same way. I cut out my background with the Petite Scallops Rectangle Stacklets die using my die cut machine, and then I'm ready to put this card together. First, I'll add my background to a sugar cube card base. I'll add my cute little colored gnomes to each side of my card front, and I will pop those up with foam squares to attach them. I'm stamping the I Heart You sentiment in Oreo ink between the two gnome hats on the card front. So I'll set that up in my MISTI. I'll set the stamp where I want it. I'll pick it up on the lid and ink it up with Oreo ink and then stamp that onto my card. Next, I'm adding the toadstools on either side of each gnome on the card front. I had added stick it to the back of the cardstock when I die cut these out, so all I need to do is peel off that paper backing and stick them right into place where I want them. And finally, I'm adding that heart banner that I created at the beginning of the video so that each gnome is holding one end of the banner. I'll use some liquid adhesive and I'm just putting a dot, and I'll add one end of the burlap twine into that dot. You need to let this dry, have patience, it's worth it. And once that's dry, you can add the glue to the other gnome's hand. I held things in place with my bone folder, and maybe you have something similar you can set to hold things in place while the glue dries. Once the glue was dry, I used my scissors to cut the extra burlap twine down a little bit. I also used my paper piercer, but you could use a needle or a pin just to fray the ends of the twine just a bit so it looks a little bit more like they're holding a rope. And that completes this cute gnome card. I hope you learned something new today that you might try out on a future project. You can find all of the supplies to create this project in the Tailored Expressions web store at tailoredexpressions.com. Thanks so much for joining me, everybody, and I'll see you next time.